Well, we'll turn over the time to Jeff Leaf now. He's done a lot of work on this project. We're excited to hear it. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Good evening. My name's Jeff Grief. I'm a. Okay, we're gonna get the door closed there. Okay, my name's Jeff Grief. I'm a Plumas County resident. I retired up here in 2020, just in time for the Dixie Fire. And I live out in Indian Valley. And I'm active with the Fire Safe Council doing volunteer work with the Plumas Underburn Cooperative. I bought my property in 2007 in Indian Valley up on the hillside and spent my vacations from work down in Silicon Valley building a cabin up there. Then, like I say, retired to the cabin in 2020. Dixie Fire came shortly thereafter, but the fire went across my property, but it did not burn my cabin and buildings because I had done the thinning and the underburning that the Fire Safe Council recommended that I do. I listened to them and took their advice about what to do. So my place and numerous other places in Indian Valley are good examples of how if we remove forest biomass, we can save houses and we can save the forest. So after that, the fire, we were all looking for solutions. We're all looking for solutions. And I came across this idea of processing forest biomass, chips, wood chips, which we've all seen, piles of chips, into horticultural potting substrate, which is the primary ingredient that gets used in potting mixes for commercial, retail, et cetera. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I ran across this on the internet, snooping around with various things. Actually, I ran across an article by the Royal Horticultural Society, and they mentioned this. So anyway, I pursued it from there, and it looked like a good idea, okay? We need to get rid of the biomass. The horticultural industry needs a substitute for peat moss. I'll talk about that more later, but they're looking for more material. So we've got the material, let's use it. It seemed like a good idea. Okay, well, you know, we've all seen good ideas, and good ideas sometimes come to fruition, sometimes they don't. But I kept researching it. Oh, excuse me, before I go on, I just want to say to the people who are on Zoom that if you have any questions, would you please put them into the chat? And my friend Paul is going to keep an eye on the chat so that I can answer those questions. Okay. So continuing, I kept researching this, kept looking into it to see if it would be a good idea. I suggested this idea to some of the local organizations, Sierra Institute, Fire Safe Council, Resource Conservation District, to see if they thought this might be a good idea. And they did think it was a good idea, but they didn't have the resources, the capacity to pursue it. Which makes sense because trying to start a business doing something like this is a difficult thing to do. It involves a lot of work and time, et cetera. The basic idea is to make a factory in Plumas County with the machines that are required to make this product and ship it out to the horticultural industry. And starting something like that is a big endeavor. So I realized, you know, they didn't have the time or the capacity. I'm retired. I get a check from the public employee retirement system every month for doing nothing at all. So I figured I would take this on. So if something like this is going to happen, someone's got to drive it. You can't do it halfway. It has to, you know, be driven. I decided to take on this project. So here I am. So what is the... Well, thank you. I enjoy it. I like talking to and dealing with all the people that I do. And as my father would say, it keeps me out of the bars. But anyway, I have enjoyed this, getting both into the forestry end of things and talking with people there and the horticultural industry, which I'll talk about a bit more. Next slide, please. So we all know the problem with forest biomass, but I'll just briefly review it. Because of fire suppression over the last 100 years, there's an excessive buildup of biomass in our forests. The problem with that is that when forest fires come through, it causes fires to burn very catastrophically, and it kills everything. So on my hillside, I did thinning, as I explained, and about half the trees on my 10 acres survived the fire. But not all, but most of the rest of the entire hillside there where I am is dead because it wasn't treated and the fire just killed all the trees. But we know that if you do the thinning and underburning, then when the forest fire comes through, there's less fuel, the large trees survive. So we are in an effort to remove that biomass. We all know we need to remove it. The Forest Service wants to treat hundreds of thousands of acres in the coming years. But how do we do it? It's a big task. There's a lot of work involved, and it just simply costs a lot of money. The best way to do it is to commercialize it. If we can find a market for the biomass and sell it to somebody, if we can bring in money from some other industry, then that will help us pay the cost of removing the material from the forest. So that's the basic idea that I'm working on here. Numerous ideas have been tried to do this, to try to commercialize biomass. It's considered a low-value product. It's used for energy generation, but the economics there are really sketchy. Other things have been tried, and so there haven't been very many successful ideas. I'm hoping that this is a successful idea because, as I said, the horticultural industry needs this. I'll explain that more here in a minute. Next slide. Oops. There you go. That's good.
You all right?
No, one before that. There you go. Okay, so we know the problem that we have with biomass. The horticultural industry has a problem. They need a substitute for peat moss. So since World War II, peat moss has been the primary ingredient that is used in potting mixes, etc. Lee, could you mute? There you go. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So since World War II or so, the horticultural industry has been using peat moss primarily for potting mixes. Everything from the bagged mixes that you see in the nursery down here and at the hardware store for home use to huge commercial nurseries. And we'll see some photos of those in a minute. Canada has typically been exporting 1.3 million tons of peat moss to the United States yearly in the last few decades. And peat moss is perfect for potting. It drains really well. You need that drainage so that your roots don't rot. Drains well, but it retains moisture. It's really a perfect solution to the problem of potting, because if you just put dirt in a pot, it doesn't work. You know that. So, but the problem is that the peat moss harvest, there are several problems with peat, and the peat moss harvest has been reduced greatly by climate change. So over the last year, it was really severe. They had the worst peat harvest in Canada that they've had ever. It was reduced by 25 to 50%. The reason for that is that they've had excessive rains. Climate change is bringing in more rain in Canada in the spring and the summer. Canada, the landmass of Canada is about 10 or 11% peat bogs. They're only harvesting peat out of less than 1% of that, but still they can't harvest it. They're having trouble because of the changes in climate patterns. So the photograph on the right here, can we get the let's see, that's showing on the screen.
Yeah.
I think that if we
Do you want to minimize it?
do that, there we go. So there's this one.
Lighting.
The lighting is good. Thank you, Earl.
Dim, mirror, or
Good the way it is.
okay.
Thank you. The photograph on the right is a peat bog that's prepared for harvesting. As you can see, the surface appears dry. There's trenches there. They cut trenches to drain the water out of the peat bogs. The peat bogs are ordinarily completely soaked. And what they do is they take big tractors with vacuums and they actually vacuum the peat off the surface. That's how all the 1.3 million tons of peat that comes to the United States gets harvested. The photo on the left is a peat bog, which obviously is very wet. And I don't know exactly what this when this photo was taken, but it could be that they're in the process of draining that peat bog, or it could be that it's wet because of the rains. But anyway, the point is they cannot harvest the peat when there's excessive rains. That's what's been happening. And as I said, the peat harvest has been cut by 25 to 50%. That was last year. So the horticultural industry knows that they need to make up the shortfall. Now, along with that problem, there's the fact that that we got to ship that peat, even if you can harvest it, 2,000 miles to California. That's a lot of transportation cost. And also draining peat bogs has a high greenhouse gas impact. This is kind of a controversial issue about, greenhouse gases, et cetera. But that is a concern for many horticulturalists. It's certainly a concern for the grants that I'm applying for. But even aside from the whole greenhouse gas issue, the horticultural industry is very concerned about the shortfall of peat because the supply has been reduced and because the price is so high. Next slide, please. So they are looking for solutions. They want something, they want to make up the shortfall. Wood is good. We can make a juncture between horticulture and forestry in California. We can have a mutually beneficial relationship. We can take the excess forest biomass from the forests and process it into a product that can be used in nurseries. In the center there, the center photo, that's Dr. Brian Jackson of North Carolina State University, who I have partnered with. I sent to him 6 pallets of samples of our wood species. You can see in the back of the photo there, this big bags that I sent to him via truck. And he runs the largest substrates laboratory in the country. Brian is a real powerhouse and he's been a great help. So he's been assessing Western wood species to see if they will work well as horticultural substrate. And he said that Western wood species have never been tested for this before. The wood fiber that's being produced elsewhere it comes from different species. Let's see. Let's try the next slide. Yeah, okay, so processing wood chips into potting substrate. This has been done in Europe for the last 2 decades. It was invented in France in 1980 or so, but it's only been the last few decades that they've really been accelerating this. I went to Netherlands in November to visit a factory where they make the machinery that produces wood fiber, makes some of the machinery, and we went to visit a bunch of different mixing operations where they make mixes for potting. And they are gradually beginning to incorporate more and more wood fiber into their mixes. Although the growers, they want peat because they know it. It's reliable. It's what they've used, but they're starting to come up against the wall. They're in the same way that we can't harvest as much here in North America. So the peat that comes from Latvia and Finland, that peat supply has been reduced, and there are a lot of concerns about that. So they're making the transition in Europe. It's been produced here in the United States on the East Coast for about 8 years or so. A company called Profile Products has been producing a product in North Carolina called hydrofiber, which is very popular in the horticultural industry. But if they're going to use it here in California, they've got to pay 2,500 miles the transportation cost to bring it from North Carolina to here. So this has not yet been done in the Western US on any scale. There are a couple of businesses that I think are making some wood fiber substrate. One thing I wanted to clarify is that there's a big difference between substrate, potting substrate, and mulches and composts. Now, there are all kinds of different mulches and composts, and many businesses make mulches and composts from forest products, ground up bark, etc. And there are a lot of different products. And so I can't speak for them all, but in general, most of those don't work well as a potting substrate because they don't drain well. Like I was saying, you've got to have good drainage so that the roots don't rot. When you specially engineer the wood fiber into a long fiber, very fluffy consistency, it does drain well. And so that's what horticulturalists need, is something that drains very well. So as I said, the Western US, this hasn't been done on any serious scale just yet. That's my plan. What I want to do is get the machinery that's involved to process large amounts of wood chips, etc., starting out at maybe 10 or 20,000 tons a year. And if things work out, maybe work up to 50 or 100,000 tons a year. This is also something that could be done in other parts of California. There's a plentiful supply of biomass, obviously. It would cost less for the users here in California on the West Coast. And it has far less greenhouse gas impacts. Actually, making wood fiber sequesters carbon in the wood fiber rather than burning it, etc. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, horticulture uses a lot of growing media. Here's a statistic from the USDA. In 2019, in California alone, 822 businesses bought growing media for a total of $67 million. That equates in California alone to about 1 million tons of growing media that are used in California. And that includes all different ingredients: peat, perlite, core, which is coconut husk, wood fiber, bark, compost, etc. The photograph on the right is Altman Nurseries down south, north of San Diego. They are a very large commercial nursery. As you can see, they're producing plants as far as the eye can see. Everything you're seeing there is one species, those of some kind of a shrub, which is headed off for the big box stores, Home Depot, etc. And they are now using a mixture of 40% wood fiber and I think 60% peat. They're using the hydrofiber product that I described that's made in North Carolina. So they like it. It saves them money. It costs them less than peat. The nursery on the left is Olive Hill Nurseries, again down there north of San Diego. This is a greenhouse operation growing all kinds of ornamentals like bromeliads, et cetera, and hanging ferns and whatnot. Olive Hill is a smaller nursery. They are not able to make long-term contracts with the peat suppliers. And so they are the ones that are getting the shortfall. Altman, on the right, they've got long-term contracts with the peat suppliers like Berger and others. And so they get what they want. They can get their peat. But Olive Hill is not able to. They're small. They're a smaller buyer. So when there's less peat, the peat suppliers supply, their big accounts, and then the small ones kind of get cut short. So the point is that in Olive Hill Nursery here, they are using a mixture of wood fiber and peat moss that comes from Denmark. It's made by Pinstrip Company because they just can't get peat here in North America. And the wood fiber that they are getting is made either in Latvia or maybe Germany. So the point is, we've got people in California importing biomass from Europe. It doesn't make much sense, does it? Next slide, please. Okay, so sounds like a good idea. How do we make this stuff? Here are two possibilities for how to do it. The photos on the right I took in the Netherlands there, just south of Amsterdam. This is a large yard that makes a lot of growing substrate for the greenhouses in Netherlands. Netherlands has a lot of greenhouses. They grow most of the vegetables for all of Western Europe, which was kind of surprising. So there are a lot of mixing yards there. When I was there, we visited 6 or 7, some big, some small, but they process a lot of material. So anyway, they're producing wood fiber substrate at this particular place with a machine that's called a twin screw extruder. on the top right photo, there are two sheds there. Each one has an extruder machine in it. Wood chips are being fed in. They're processed by the extruder. And then they go off to the bunkers, which are shown in the lower right photo. So the machines are pretty simple. The only thing about the extruders is they cost $1 million each. So that's kind of pricey. And then on the left is what's called a hammer mill. That's a different way to produce wood fiber substrate and a lot less expensive. That machine is like less than $500,000. And so it's a less expensive machine, but the material that it produces is not quite as good quality as what comes from an extruder. So you got two choices. You can get a cheaper machine that makes a material that's going to be of interest to a certain segment of horticulture, but not broad interest to horticulture. Or you can get the expensive machine and make a product that that is of interest to of broad interest to all the horticulture industry. So my plan, next slide, please, is a two-phase project. Phase one is to get a hammer mill, a 200 horsepower hammer mill that will in total cost about $750,000. This is a less expensive way to get started to prove the concept. So I need to prove the concept, prove that the horticultural industry wants to buy this, prove that it's can be economical. And this is kind of the pilot project, the easier way to go. The material produced from a hammer mill would be of use to the retail home and garden bagging market, but probably not so much to the large commercial nurseries. Then once phase one has gotten into operation and we've proven the concept, then it'll make it easier for me to apply for grants to do the second phase, which is to get some of those twin screw extruder machines. And also a baling setup and a baling line, bunch of machines that will make bales of material. That in itself costs like $1 or $1.2 million. So the total cost of the extruder setup would be about $5 to $8 million. This is a more expensive way to go, but it has a greater economy of scale. And the extruded material is of broader use to the commercial nursery operations. And being baled, it's less expensive to ship. So that's my plan, is to try to do phase one first, and then having proven the concept, to move to phase two. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I've been working on this for the last 2 years. I've had help from a lot of different people, and here is a kind of a summary of the different things that I have done to try to get this going. I've had Western wood species validated for the use by Dr. Brian Jackson at North Carolina State University. He's had our samples since like May of last year or June. And he's going to be publishing in a peer-reviewed journal at some point. He's not quite done with that yet, but he has said that in his preliminary results that there's no problem with our species. So we had him test Doug fir, white fir, yellow pine, white pine, and incense cedar, and they're fine. They'll work for the purpose. I've got a matching funding commitment from blueforest.org, which provides financing for forestry operations. They've committed up to $2 million in matching funds for, in the case that I get large grants from like USDA, then they will help with matching to get those grants. Often to get a grant, you need to have matching funds lined up. So Blue Forest has very generously offered that. I've identified 3 potential sites where this could be located. There's a site on Mill Creek Street Road there by the Plumas Corp offices behind the lumber mill. I've been talking to the owner at the Sloat Mill who owns the old Sloat Mill. There's several buildings out there. That's another possible site. And then I've been talking to the owner of a business in Butte Valley Supply. I'll talk more about that in a minute. That is an existing business making compost, and he is very interested in producing wood fiber substrate. I've been attending various trade shows, trade groups, various nurseries and mixing operations to get to know the horticulture industry. I've also taken a bunch of classes online on how to be an entrepreneur, because I haven't done this before other than sell lemonade when I was a kid. So anyway, these classes are very good. And what they've taught me is that you have to find out what your market really wants. You can't make the thing that you think they want. You got to make what you know they want. And so you have to get into the market to talk to the people that would actually be the buyers. And that's been a lot of fun and very educational. Been to a bunch of different trade shows up in Portland, down in San Diego. I just got back from Las Vegas for the Indoor Ag Con, which is all about just growing agriculture inside greenhouses. So that was fun. So there's been support, almost unanimous support from all segments of California horticulture. Everyone that I talk to says they know about wood fiber. Of course, they can get it from, but they have to get it from out of state. They know that it works well. They know they've got a problem with peat. They need a supplement. They want to see it produced here on the West Coast. So why hasn't it happened yet? And I think there's two answers to that question. The first is just that it's kind of new in horticulture. It's been around for a while, but it's not as well established as peat moss and coconut husk. And the second thing is that it's just expensive to set up a facility and get something like this going. So several of the large suppliers of soilless growing media have expressed interest in this and made noises or motions about the possibility of setting up their own operations, but it hasn't happened yet. So maybe we will be the first. I've gotten support from the Plumas National Forest officials. Like I said earlier, they plan to treat hundreds of thousands of acres, but they're both going to cut dead trees in the burned areas, and they want to continue thinning the green areas. Material that comes from both of those kinds of operations can work for this. Yes. Yeah, couldn't get it. There's a jacket back there. Is that yours? Yeah.
Okay, never mind, out there, it's, sorry.
That's okay. The Plumas National Forest is going to be working with a lot of different contractors to do the thinning operations that they want to do. And they want to see an outlet for the biomass. The thing about the contractors that work for the National Forest Service is that they will go out and they'll do thinning, but removing the material from where they're doing the work is one of the most expensive parts about the whole operation. So often they don't remove it. And the Forest Service understands this because they know that there just isn't the money to remove it. So they'll leave log decks out there, or they'll pile it up to burn it. I think in some cases they'll chip it and just leave the chips on the ground. So the fuel stays in the forest, but it's concentrated and they've thinned out a large area. So the Forest Service would like to see biomass operations that are paying some of the cost of hauling that stuff out of the forest, because it'll help get it out. That's the main idea, get that fuel out of the forest. I've been working on getting a feasibility study going. I've applied to CAL FIRE for a grant to fund a feasibility study from some qualified consultants. The Fire Safe Council has agreed to help me with that, for which I'm very grateful. The project has been included in the Plumas County 2021 Long-Term Wildfires Recovery Plan, which Tracy Ferguson and others have been working on for several years now. And that's very helpful. It shows that I've got public support, and I've got grant applications off to CAL FIRE and USDA. Now, right now, this is structured as my company, an LLC, and there are limited grant funds that are available to private companies for this kind of thing. The CAL FIRE Workforce and Development Grant is one of those grants, and then the USDA Wood Innovations Grants are both available for private businesses to encourage creating businesses that use forest products. However, there are a lot more grant monies available to nonprofit organizations. That's just the way it is. And so I would like this project to be under the arm of a nonprofit. And I'm in the process of asking whether any of the local nonprofits would be interested in that. And so we'll see where that goes. So it may stay a private business. It may become nonprofit. In some ways, I prefer that it's nonprofit because I want to see the project be oriented towards the interests our interests of cleaning out the forests rather than be primarily oriented towards the profit motive, but you know, that's there's a balance there. Next, please. So one of the ways, the best way to get started with something like this is to incorporate it into an existing business. If I'm trying to start a business myself from the ground up, that's a lot of work, and it's a very hard thing to do. So I have learned about a gentleman down in Butte County near Butte College, Joel White, who runs a business called Butte Valley Supply and the Earthworm Soil Factory. And what Joel does down there is he grows earthworms. The photograph on the lower right shows the bins where he's growing earthworms and getting earthworm castings. And what he does is he takes the earthworm castings, mixes them up with biomass to create a high quality compost, which is a good idea. And he sells that to local landscapers, homeowners, and other people. I approached Joel. He's very enthusiastic about the possibility of making soil substrate. My idea is to do the phase 1 hammer mill project down there with Joel. That's what I want to do at first to get this started. That's my goal right now, is to try to get funding to get a hammer mill to Joel, get him set up and incorporate this into his business. He's got an existing business. He's got the buildings, he's got customers, he has machines like loaders and everything. So it would be easier to get it set up there rather than to start a business from scratch. So that's my plan right now, is to get Joel going with phase 1. Then once he has demonstrated that that this works and that the horticultural industry wants this, then I would apply for other grants and try to get the extruder operation going on up here in Quincy. So we'd have 2 operations going, processing chips from the lower part of Lassen and Plumas and chips from the upper part. So that is my plan. I hope that this can become a significant contribution to our need to remove biomass from the forests. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to change everything, but we need a lot of different solutions. This could end up pulling 50, 60, 70,000 tons of chips out of the forest every year. And I believe that it can be a profitable business because the horticultural industry wants this, as I said, that we're not just producing something that they don't need, we're producing something that they are actively looking for. And I know what the price is that I can get for it, et cetera. I think there's enough money there to sustain a business. And I'm hoping that that's where this is going to go. Okay, so that is my presentation, and I'm wondering if we have any questions. Thank you. I believe the woman in the front was first.
Oh, have you looked at how you're gonna get the biomass out of where it's being cut? You know, just being part of the fuel reduction grant for Eastern Plumas on a large number of acres. You can't get in there with a truck. I mean, which is why they masticate and then they take out only the large fuel. And the cost of removing that fuel is, I mean, you have to pay somebody to take it. I mean, so I'm just wondering if the fuel is so widespread in the area, and it's also a mix of woods, you know, which I don't know if in your study they looked at, does it matter what the composition is, you know, it's 90% pine and a little bit of cedar, you know, because you get a mix when they chop it, they don't put it in a pile and segregate it. So I mean, do you have a plan, or have you done the math to look at, you know, bringing it out, getting it out, and then transporting it to a facility where it can be processed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for those on Zoom who didn't hear the question was, have I looked at the cost of removing the material from the forest and what's involved there? And yes, I have. And there are definitely some projects where they can't remove it because they can't get trucks in. But there are a lot of projects where they can. So the contractors that do the projects for the Forest Service, they basically are faced with the cost of chipping and shipping. So if they're gonna go in and thin 40, 100 acres and thin it and chip it, excuse me, and ship the chips out, they got to bring in a big chipping machine. They got to have a excavator there with a grapple to feed stuff into it. Then they got to have a loader, and they have to have access with trucks. All that's very expensive. So some projects are just too far away from any source that can buy the material. But some are closer. So, but a facility like this, taking money from the horticultural industry, would be able to pay a certain amount. What it kind of really comes down to is dollars per ton. So, you know, one of those big chipper trucks holds 20 or 25 tons. If you can pay them $50 a ton, then, you know, that's $1,000 a truck. And that seems to be close to the line of what is feasible and what isn't. So it varies from project to project. There are also sometimes subsidies, transportation subsidies that can kick in for this from CAL FIRE. So we could get into a situation where we're paying the contractors $50 a ton. A CAL FIRE subsidy is paying another $30 a ton. And then maybe part of the Forest Service contract is some funding for the transportation costs. So it really depends on the individual contract and the specific situation. The advantage here is that we're bringing in money from horticulture. Does that answer your question? Next behind.
The question I have is, you're talking about the forest and what have you, we all care about the forest, that's why we live in Plumas County. But what we're caring about after the Dixie Fire is our towns, our communities. So how does what you're talking about do that? I live on 15 acres, do about 50 fern piles a year average, and that's a lot of biomass, and I hate burning it up sometimes, but I don't have a choice. So how is your project helpful to those of us in this room that are wanting to get rid of the biomass from our yards and properties, the way we used to be able to with the mill? You know, you could go down to the mill and do a dump. Now it's $200 a trailer load, which gets really expensive.
Yes, yeah, so the question is, how does this project help local homeowners, landowners with their efforts to clear their land and property? And this project would probably not directly affect local landowners dealing with 5, 10, 15 acres. However, the Forest Service has prioritized the areas around residential areas. For instance, there's the Claremont project that they're working on to thin out there. And so those large projects would supply chips to this. Now, in addition to this, I'm working with the Fire Safe Council, and they have a project now which they hope will assist with what you're talking about. They're looking at a facility that would produce energy, and maybe I would buy some of that energy for this separate operation. And so they would produce energy using biomass that comes in from all takers, any kind of municipal sources. And they're looking now at air burners, which are a particular type of device, a little hard to describe, but it's like a big open container. You just dump wood in it, and it has a special air circulation thing, air curtain burner, which burns the material down quickly, and they want to make biochar out of it. So I think the idea there is to receive any kind of municipal waste, and probably from smaller thinning projects where they're doing 10, 15 acres, they would be able to load stuff onto trucks and bring it down there. So it could be that the municipal waste, such as from home projects or residential projects, produces the energy that then is for the machines that I use that process the large bulk material that comes from the Forest Service. But this is all kind of speculative. That answer your question? Thank you. And yes, next to her. Yes.
Well, is the resource using its chips?
Yes.
You're not taking the log, you need chips.
Correct. I need to put chips into the machines. I can't put whole logs into the machines, but we could get in a situation where we are taking logs and chipping them up ourselves. But yes, you need to have, chips need to be fed into the machines that make the wood fiber substrate. The question was, am I taking chips or logs? Yes, yes, sir.
If you captured 10% of the peat market, peat moss market, what, give us in dollars, what that would be?
In dollars, okay, 10% of the peat moss market. It's hard to say, but we do know that in California, okay, in California, we use about 1 million tons, they use about 1 million tons of growing media a year in the nursery industry. That's just California. And there's also, Arizona, Oregon, Washington, et cetera. But let's just work with 1 million tons of material that they're producing every year. So if we were doing 10% of that, that'd be 100,000 tons, which, in dollars. Well, let's see, 100,000 tons is about 400,000 yards. And I would be selling the material at about $15 a yard. So what's 400,000 times 15?
6 million.
60 something,
Mhm.
$60 million.
60 million or 6 million?
6 million.
You tell me,
6 million.
400,000 times 15.
would that be enough money to get this project from 10% to more than 10% of the peat market, peat moss market?
Would that be enough money to get this?
So you could start capturing more and more of the market as you went from one machine to a second machine.
Yeah, so the question is what the value of this would be and the ability of the project to expand. And I think that once we get established in the horticultural industry, they are, first of all, they understand they need to transition away from peat. So they are going to be using more wood fiber as a proportion of what they're using now. But also they're going to be increasing their use of substrates in coming years. So the prediction is that they will double or quadruple their use of substrates in the coming years. More and more fruits and vegetables are being grown in greenhouses because the conditions are controllable. Whereas with climate change, growing things outside is less predictable than it used to be. So as the horticultural industry demands more material, I think that this would grow.
And if I could add to that, that's part of the reason that we've been talking about a feasibility study to step one. Because the feasibility study, the consultants are going to be looking at what the cost is for startup, but also in the long run, what the projected revenues will be realized. Because if we just take the idea and we leave it there and everything, and we don't talk to the consultants who have done long-range planning, then we're not going to have a really good basis to work off of. So the feasibility study is to prove that this is viable economically, environmentally, culturally in the community. All of those things are what, once we would get all the funding, get the consultants on board, it would be to say, yes, these will satisfy all these different concerns. Jeff's idea that he's bringing to you is a sound idea, but playing it out over the years, does it really make sense to pursue?
Yeah, and in connection with that, I just want to say that from all these classes about how to be an entrepreneur that I've been taking, what they'll tell you is that like 80% of new businesses fail. The ones that succeed have one thing in common, and that is that they get a very good business plan at the outset and they stick to it. You've got to look at your numbers closely. Now, I'm not a real professional at this. I've become kind of a jack of all trades for all different aspects of this project. I'm not the greatest economist in the world. That's why I want the feasibility study to really refine my my business plan and know what we're doing coming into this rather than just going into it blindly, which is unfortunately what a lot of new people do with new businesses, and that's the cause of a lot of failures.
Will,
Yes, sir.
will the study deliver
the nonprofit and for-profit version? Do they care about that?
No, that's not in the plan. So that's an interesting question. I haven't thought about that.
Just from where I sit, nonprofit and the grant market is stronger, but I think that's a profitable operation if you have capital.
Yeah, it's all about the capital. Any,
Because the nonprofit could even restrict growth. You know what I mean?
Can you speak up a bit, so we can hear you?
I'm a proponent of for-profit on something of this scale because it could get so massive and provide jobs and all the things that we do as a, community. I think the nonprofit funding would restrict that opportunity to grow at large.
But some of the nonprofit foundations that I've written grants to would enjoy the partnership with a profit organization if it's going to serve the community. You see, like the college and the school district both have their public entities that they're generating money, and they have foundations. And it allows the different public agencies and the for-profits to partner with a nonprofit. And that's why Jeff had mentioned earlier, looking for nonprofit partners is another strategy so that we can work together. If we only look at it, is it for-profit or nonprofit? This is more community oriented. What's going to work best for the forests and the communities?
yes, John.
Since the Parsippany Council got started in 2002, it's done scores of projects, a variety of sizes, from 5 acres to 500 acres. It's continuing to develop projects with the funds it's received from various sources. Now, since the fires, I think we all know, David Little can speak more directly to it, but we all know that the market for logs has gone through a terrible up and down cycle. Given that there's so many logs out there that they became, no matter how big they were, very low value. That's a relatively temporary condition more than that. 5 years from now, all the fire dead trees will be down and useless for most anything. But there will be a real log market at that point that will reappear. And at that time, Fire State Council and others can start developing projects that use some combination of sale of logs, chips, and the sale of chips and underburden to accomplish the ecological goals. And it will provide a different structure. Now, right now, the structure is, there's nothing coming from logs. But that, so that should be looked at. We have to look at, in a feasibility study, what will happen under that scenario. Will it work or not? But then, in fairness, you have to look at the other side of the equation where there is a log market. And that can be used in some way, shape, or form to subsidize that trip out of the woods for the chips. Now, so a real good feasibility study, besides dealing with nonprofit versus for-profit, has to do no revenue scenarios and big revenue scenarios from the smaller trees that are out there now. So I think that Jeff's on the right track to look at both those huge issues as part of this. Maybe as it specifically said, he needs to work at the for-profit versus nonprofit. But right now it's got both with the Fire State Council and the LLC. So I think he's got a great track to move this down the road.
Did you just throw Sierra Pacific Industry into that? Is that what I heard out of that?
Say what?
Well-
I didn't come prepared to say anything. But I will say, Jeff's point about getting biomass out of the woods is a real cost. And and he threw out $1,000 a load. I would say that's even conservative. We have a lot of inflationary costs these days, whether it's wages or fuel and these things, and it costs a lot of money to get chips out of the woods. That's why they're left in the woods a lot of times, even on viable logging jobs where green logs are getting paid for and coming out of the woods. Chips are often left if they're allowed to be leaved because logs have to subsidize chips coming out. Even if there's a place to go, like a Sierra Pacific or a Collins Pine, or there's a biomass plant still there, Honey Lake Power up there in Honey Lake. And you know, there's a reason why the Loyalton sawmill, it shut down. Sierra Pacific had a long-term contract with Nevada Energy to supply energy at the cogen plant. They tried to keep the cogen plant running, and it failed financially, because when you have a cogen not attached to a sawmill and you don't have the natural synergy that that provides, you can't pay enough for the chips to, even if you have a contractor there that's willing to pay for the energy you're producing. It's a lot. It'll be interesting to see what the Fire Safe Council can do with trying to produce a little power from biomass. They're doing it on a small scale, of course, but
Yes.
That'll be interesting to see that little experiment and how that.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but thanks for jumping in.
You did.
The gentleman in the back had his hand up.
Yeah, so the county was already in the same boat with the closure of the biomass that we have out of the home and service facility. We know the inflation of, we were sold a project of you're gonna get material for $15 a yard. This year, $62 a yard for fuel. And what Dave would say, it ends up breaking, you know, at what point can you feasibly not do something? You know, and so when you say you're gonna sell it for $15, you know, a yard, are you looking at the possibility of a few years down the road in the state of the county where you're up 400 or 500% on your product coming in, and what's your product going out?
Yeah, there's one more thing I want to throw in here, which isn't
Make it quick.
a silver bullet. Okay, there's one thing that's happening around the state is attempts are being made to make what are called aggregation facilities. These are biomass facilities where biomass from a given area is aggregated in one place. It's like a biomass brokerage. And this makes it easier for the producers to have some place to bring it, and it's easier for buyers to have some place to buy it. I'm not sure how this affects all the economics of it, but it just makes the logistics of getting biomass located where it needs to go easier. So that's something I'm going to be looking into, is the possibility of starting an aggregation facility for biomass in Plumas County.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
I recently had to have 23 trees taken off my property because of bark beetle infestation. Got $10,000 to have that done. If you could take those trees and chip them up to utilize them, I think there's a big possibility that there's going to be a lot of mortality in trees probably in Quincy and the surrounding area and on the forest too. So maybe using the chipping facility yourself to take those trees, if you could use them, would be a big help, I think, because right now the mill won't take the log. They have an abundance of logs, and the only thing a person can do now is cut them down and store them on their own property and cut them up and try to sell them as firewood or whatever. But you have an abundance of trees and you can't do it. It'd be a great way of getting rid of
Any
it.
chat?
No, there was just this one.
Thank you.
Sorry to wrap it up. I know there's lots of questions and interest.
Nice job, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Rick, if you win it, you can donate it back or give it away.
Let's see.
How much did you pay for the ticket?
Paul, grab one.